I found the note tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail. It wasn't meant for me, but it had my name on it. "She's a burden. We can't keep doing this." My hands trembled as I read the words scrawled in my daughter-in-law's rushed handwriting. They didn't know I'd see it. They probably assumed I couldn't even read without my glasses anymore. But I did. Every single word. Up until that moment, I thought I was helping. I thought that by moving into their guest room after my husband passed, I was giving us all a chance to heal, to be closer, to support one another like family should. Instead, they whispered behind closed doors. They rolled their eyes when I asked for help with the stairs. They mocked me when they thought I couldn't hear. I became a ghost in the house I helped them buy. But what started as a gesture of love turned into something far more disturbing. You see, they didn't know I had the means. They never asked. They assumed I was just another aging widow clinging to her son's life because she had nowhere else to go. But I had choices. I had savings and I had limits. The day I found that note, something inside me shifted. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet, deliberate resolve. They thought they could take my kindness for granted, that I would stay, shrink, and apologize for existing. They never imagined I'd leave, and they certainly never expected what I'd leave behind. My name is Margaret, and I spent most of my life in the warm desert town of Mesa, Arizona. I was born and raised there, surrounded by sprawling cacti and endless blue skies. Growing up, my parents instilled in me the values of kindness, resilience, and hard work. I took those lessons to heart and lived by them every day. I worked as a school teacher for over 40 years, teaching generations of children not just how to read or solve math problems, but how to treat others with respect and empathy. It was never just a job to me, it was a calling. I loved those kids like they were my own, and the community became my second family. Every year, I looked forward to the start of the school year like a fresh beginning, full of hope and promise. My husband Tom was my partner in everything. I met him in college and married shortly after. He was a gentle soul, calm, and dependable. Tom was the kind of man who never needed to say much. His actions spoke louder than words. Together, we built a quiet life filled with love, laughter, and small joys. We didn't have much money, but what we had was enough. Our home was modest but warm, and every corner was filled with memories. When Tom passed away 2 years ago, I felt like I was losing more than my husband. I lost my anchor. At 72 years old, suddenly alone in a house that now felt too big and too quiet, I struggled to find my footing. The silence was deafening. I missed his presence beside me, the way he'd read the newspaper while I cooked dinner, or how he'd hold my hand on Sunday mornings when we went for a walk. My children, David and Emily, were grown with families of their own. They lived in different states, and I often felt like a visitor in their lives. Different cities and busy lives made it difficult for us to connect. I didn't want to burden them, and they didn't want to burden me. So we all tiptoed around the subject of what would happen next. I knew they loved me, but it felt like a delicate dance, like everyone was trying to protect each other from the inevitable loneliness that would come. Eventually, the loneliness became unbearable. After months of hesitation and with a heart full of hope, I asked my son David if I could move in with him and his family. He and his wife Karen lived in a lovely house in a quiet Phoenix suburb, and they had 2 children, Emily and Jacob, my sweet grandchildren, whom I wanted to be close to. David was kind and supportive when I told him. "Mom, we'd love to have you," he said warmly. I felt relief and excitement. A new chapter was beginning. Maybe this would be the time I'd find happiness again, surrounded by family and laughter. The house was beautiful, with stucco walls and terracotta roof tiles. The desert landscape stretched beyond the windows, dotted with blooming agave and palo verde trees. The neighborhood was peaceful, with friendly neighbors and wide sidewalks perfect for afternoon walks. It was the kind of place where children rode bikes and neighbors waved hello. I was given a small guest room on the second floor near the children's rooms. It wasn't much, but it was my space, a little refuge where I could retreat when the noise of the household became overwhelming. I tried to stay independent. I cooked my own meals, sometimes kept my things tidy, and didn't want to be a nuisance. David was a quiet man, the kind who showed love in small ways rather than grand gestures. He'd bring me coffee in the morning or fix the leaky faucet in my room without being asked. I appreciated these moments. They reminded me of the bond we had, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. Karen was different. At first, she welcomed me warmly, but as weeks passed, I sensed a shift. Her smile became tighter, more strained. She seemed exhausted, stretched thin between work, the kids, and managing the household. I tried to be understanding, but sometimes her patience wore thin with me. She would sigh heavily when I asked for help or lingered too long in conversation. The warmth I hoped for felt like a flickering candle, always on the verge of going out. The kids, Emily and Jacob, were sweet and polite, but their attention was mostly on their school friends and devices. They didn't ignore me, but I was more like a background figure than the lively grandmother figure I had imagined myself to be. I longed to play games with them or read stories, but their world felt distant. Despite the growing distance, I held on to hope. I reminded myself that family means patience and forgiveness. I told myself to be patient, to listen, and to give space when it was needed. I thought that maybe with time, the coldness would thaw, but it didn't. What I didn't realize was that beneath the surface, my presence was becoming a source of stress for Karen and quietly for David too. The longer I stayed, the more I sensed their discomfort, not just with me but with the life adjustments my arrival forced on them. It was subtle at first, a quick eye roll, a whispered comment stopped mid-sentence, the way they hurried through conversations when I was in the room. The family dinners became tense with forced smiles and awkward silences. I remember one evening sitting quietly at the table, hoping for a moment of connection. I tried to join in the conversation, but Karen barely looked at me and soon excused herself to get some fresh air. David gave me a polite smile, but his eyes looked tired and conflicted. The kids quickly returned to their phones, and I sat feeling more alone than ever. Despite the growing distance, I still wanted to believe in the family I had known before. But loneliness nodded at me in the quiet moments. I missed Tom's steady presence, the simple joy of feeling truly wanted. This house, which I thought would be a place of refuge and love, started to feel like a place where I was tolerated at best and resented at worst. I didn't want to believe it was true. I told myself maybe it was just stress, or maybe I was imagining things. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong, and it was only the beginning. At first, I brushed off the strange little things as figments of my imagination. Maybe it was just the adjustment of moving into a new home, the natural stress of a busy family juggling work, kids, and life. But day after day, those tiny cracks in the surface of what I'd hoped would be a warm family life kept catching my attention, and they gnawed at me. It started with the smiles. Karen's smile, in particular, was the first thing I noticed. She greeted me each morning with a polite, "Good morning, Margaret." But her eyes never quite met mine. They flicked away quickly, as if she was trying to hide something. Sometimes her smile felt forced, like a mask she wore to keep up appearances. There were moments when her mouth would curve upward, but her eyes remained cold and distant, and it left me feeling uneasy. David's smile was different. He was quieter, softer, almost distracted. He tried to be kind, bringing me a cup of coffee or asking if I needed anything. But I could sense a tension beneath it all, like he was walking on eggshells. It was as if he was caught between wanting to care for me and feeling caught in the middle of something bigger that he wasn't ready to explain. I remember one afternoon clearly, standing by the kitchen sink washing dishes. I overheard Karen and David speaking in the living room, voices low but urgent. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then I caught a few words. Too much, can't handle it, and need to figure this out. I froze, gripping the dishcloth tighter. What were they talking about? Was it me? Suddenly, the house felt colder. The warm sense of family I'd hoped for started to slip away. There were other small things, subtle but unsettling. I noticed Karen locking the front door behind her every time she left, something she hadn't done before. When I moved in, I asked her once why she gave a quick answer. It was just habit. But the way she glanced over her shoulder made me wonder if it was something more. Was she trying to keep me out or keep me in? The doors started to close in a new way. The study door remained firmly shut no matter how many times I passed by or casually asked about it. David said it was their private space, but his voice was clipped, and he quickly changed the subject. Even the children, who were usually so lively, began to behave differently around me. Emily and Jacob didn't ignore me, but their smiles felt distant, and they often hurried past my room without stopping to chat like they used to when I first moved in. I wasn't sure if they were influenced by their parents or just growing up, but it stung all the same. One evening, I decided to join the family for dinner downstairs. I was eager to feel like part of things again, to reconnect. But as I sat at the table, the air felt thick with tension. Karen was quiet, answering questions with one-word replies. David's eyes kept flickering toward the clock. The children poked at their food, avoiding eye contact. Karen forced a smile when I asked about their day, but it didn't reach her eyes. The whole evening felt like a performance, everyone playing a part to keep the peace. I finished my meal in silence, my appetite gone. The more I noticed these things, the more my mind raced. Am I imagining this? I asked myself, hoping that I was reading too much into normal family stress. I wanted so badly to believe in the warmth of family, to hold on to hope that things would get better, but my heart told me otherwise. Another moment of doubt came one night when I accidentally left my bedroom door slightly ajar. I heard soft footsteps down the hallway. I peeked out and saw Karen entering the room, quickly shutting the door behind her. I felt a pang of discomfort, but when I asked her about it the next day, she said she had just needed to grab something. Yet the incident left me wondering, why did she feel the need to go into my room without telling me? It wasn't just about privacy, it was about respect. I began noticing little things around the house too. Items moved, drawers slightly open, papers on the kitchen counter I didn't recognize. One morning, I found my personal mail on the floor near the trash can. It felt like a silent message. I kept a journal during those weeks, writing down every uncomfortable moment, every cold look or whispered conversation I overheard. My mind swung between hope and despair. Some days I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was the loneliness talking. Maybe they were just overwhelmed with life. But other days, the feelings were too strong to ignore. One particularly painful moment came when I found a note slipped under my bedroom door. It was small and folded, but the words burned into me, "She's a burden." The phrase echoed over and over in my mind. Was this what they really thought? Did they see me as nothing more than a problem, an obligation? They wished away that night I lay awake wondering how long I could keep pretending. How long before I'd be asked to leave or worse, made to feel unwelcome in the place I'd hoped to call home. The internal battle was exhausting. Part of me wanted to confront David or Karen, to ask them outright what was wrong and if I'd done something to cause this coldness. But fear held me back. I worried that confrontation might shatter whatever fragile peace remained. At the same time, another part of me refused to accept this new reality. No, I told myself, I am not a burden. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had given everything to build a family. The thought of being cast aside like unwanted furniture was unbearable. So I watched, waited, and listened. I tried to gather evidence, clues, anything that could explain what was happening behind the closed doors and quiet whispers. Every smile felt like a mask, every silence a wall. And every night as I lay alone in that small guest room, the question haunted me, am I really imagining this, or is something deeply wrong with the family I thought I belonged to? It happened on a Tuesday. Just an ordinary Tuesday. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. The smell of brewed coffee drifted up from the kitchen, and the hum of the dishwasher echoed in the background. But nothing about that day would end up being ordinary. I had woken up earlier than usual, Sleep had been elusive lately, my mind tangled in questions I couldn't answer. As I stood in the hallway stretching, I heard the front door close softly. Curious, I peeked out the window and saw Karen pulling out of the driveway alone, which was unusual. Tuesdays were her remote work days. Something nudged me. Instinct, maybe? A whisper that said, now. I had no plan, no agenda, just a strange compulsion to follow a hunch I hadn't yet fully acknowledged. I walked slowly down the hallway, stopping at the door to the study, the one that was always locked. But to my surprise, it was slightly ajar. Not open, but unlocked. I hesitated, heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't. This wasn't my space. But then again, why had it always been hidden from me? Why had Karen and David never wanted me in here? I pushed the door open. The room was cold, sterile even. A large desk sat by the window, covered in scattered documents, a laptop, a few children's drawings. There were filing cabinets lining one wall and a small locked safe in the corner. My eyes fell on the desk. On top of the mess of papers was something strange, a printed spreadsheet with names, dates, and amounts. At first glance, it looked like a financial planner. But as I scanned the details, a chill crawled down my spine. It was my name repeated over and over. Margaret R. Larkin, deposit confirmed. Margaret R. Larkin, mortgage reallocation. Margaret R. Larkin, life insurance beneficiary, removed. I stumbled back, knocking into the desk chair. My breath caught in my throat. What was I looking at? I reached for the laptop, still open, and clicked through the browser history. Passwords were saved. Tabs left open, I found email correspondence between David and someone from a legal firm. The subject line chilled me to the bone, regarding updated estate documents and primary residence transfer. The email outlined details about removing a cosigner, me, from a joint property arrangement I had no idea I'd ever agreed to. That's when the realization slammed into me. The house I had wired over a large amount of money to 6 months ago, helping them keep the house as David had pleaded, was not a shared investment. They hadn't added me to anything. They had erased me. The folder next to the laptop contained more letters from banks, a revised will with only Karen and the children listed, and what looked like a falsified letter of consent from me. The signature was eerily accurate, but I had never written it. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. My name had been used, my finances tapped, and yet I was nowhere on paper. Not a co-owner, not a dependent, just a financial tool, a temporary solution. I backed out of the study, shutting the door behind me. Something inside me screamed that I wasn't safe, that this wasn't just about money. It was a deeper betrayal, one that made me question everything about the family I had sacrificed so much for. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. I sat at the kitchen table, numb, staring at the corner of the ceiling. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a tiny dart in the molding, almost like a pinhole. I stood on a chair to look closer. It was a camera, a tiny one, barely visible to the naked eye. Heart thudding, I checked the hallway. Another one. I moved into the living room, examining the decorative shelf. Another tiny pinhole near the vase. The hairs on my neck stood up. They were watching me. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and shut the door, scanning the space with new eyes. The smoke detector. I climbed onto the bed and twisted it loose. Inside, tucked neatly into the casing, was another camera. I stared at it in disbelief. Had they really been surveilling me in my own private space? I rifled through the drawers and found an old shoebox where I kept my letters and personal notes. Inside, the envelopes had clearly been opened and resealed. Some were missing entirely. I sat on the bed, shaking, holding the camera casing in one hand and the forged estate documents in the other. My head spun. Every friendly smile, every "How are you, Mom?" every polite conversation over dinner, it had all been a performance, a trap. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the blinking light of the street lamp outside the window. I thought about how I had loved them deeply, sincerely. I had given them everything I had left, emotionally and financially, and in return, they had taken what they needed and erased me from the picture. In the morning, I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or cry or beg for answers. Instead, I took photos, clear, time-stamped photos of every document. I backed up all the emails I could from David's laptop to a thumb drive I had tucked away. I recorded videos of every camera I found in the house and where it was placed. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew I needed to leave. The final blow came 2 days later when Emily, my sweet granddaughter, knocked quietly on my door. She looked nervous, hesitant. "I'm not supposed to tell you," she whispered, eyes wide. "But Mom and Dad said you'll be going soon, that we just need to wait." Wait. That word sank into me like a knife. They were waiting me out, waiting until I either ran out of usefulness or patience. That night, I sat on my bed for the last time in that house. My suitcase was packed, hidden in the closet. I had made arrangements quietly and found a quiet retirement cottage across town with the help of a friend from church. No one knew but me. Before I left, I wrote a single note and left it on the kitchen counter. "I paid your mortgage in full. Consider it my parting gift. But never again call me a burden." And just like that, I walked out the door before sunrise. Not a word, not a tear, just silence and the sound of a woman reclaiming her dignity. The first morning after I left, the silence was both liberating and deafening. I sat alone in my tiny new cottage, sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains, clutching a chipped mug of coffee that tasted more like grief than comfort. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no soft knocks on the door asking if I'd seen the remote, no forced smiles, no cameras, just me and the echo of betrayal that lingered like smoke after a fire. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe even triumph, but instead I felt hollow, numb, like I had handed someone my heart wrapped in ribbon and watched them slice it apart with a smile. I moved slowly through the morning, showered, folded clothes I hadn't touched in years. I unpacked my suitcase mechanically, placing items on shelves without really seeing them. Every object held a memory, photos from my late husband, a recipe book stained with Thanksgiving gravy, the pearl earrings David had given me on our wedding day. Each memory whispered the same question: how did it come to this? For 3 days, I did nothing but sit with the pain. I cried in short bursts, often triggered by the smallest things, a lullaby playing from a neighbor's porch, the sight of a grandmother pushing her grandchild on a swing. I thought about Emily's little voice and how she had tried to warn me. I wondered what she was being told now, if she missed me, if she was safe in a house that had turned so cold. On the 4th day, the fog began to lift. I wasn't just grieving the loss of trust. I was grieving the version of myself who had believed she was loved unconditionally. That version had been shattered. And in its place, a quiet fire began to build. I wasn't going to let this end in silence. They had called me a burden, used me, erased me, but I still had a voice. I pulled out the manila folder I had taken with me, documents I had photographed and printed at the local library, copies of emails, images of the cameras. I discovered I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. The timeline was fuzzy at first, but with a pen and notebook, I began to map it. 6 months ago, David asked for help paying the mortgage. He called it a temporary boost. 5 months ago, they stopped including me in financial conversations. 4 months ago, I noticed the first strange behavior, Karen changing the Wi-Fi password for security. 3 months ago, the new rule was created, my name removed. 2 months ago, the cameras were installed. 1 month ago, Emily warned me. The betrayal hadn't been impulsive, it had been calculated, slow, surgical. I searched through the emails again. David had forwarded a copy of the estate paperwork to someone named Melissa Crane, a paralegal. That name stuck with me. I jotted it down. Later that afternoon, I visited the local library again. The librarian, a kind woman named Lorna, helped me find records online. We looked up Melissa Crane. She worked at a legal service downtown, Crane, Peterman, and Lowe. Lorna gave me a sympathetic look. "You're not the first person I've helped search for lawyers," she said gently. I smiled, feeling a little less alone. I left with a list of attorneys and a growing sense of purpose. That night, I called my old friend Betty, a retired probate lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. "Margaret." Her voice lit up. "It's been forever. How are you, darling?" The question broke me for a moment. I hadn't heard genuine care in someone's voice in weeks. "I'm not okay," I admitted, and I told her everything. Betty listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "What they did isn't just unethical, it may be illegal." I sat up straighter. Illegal if they forged your signature, removed you from assets you contributed to, and installed surveillance without your consent? Yes, there's a case. She offered to help, not as a lawyer, she was retired, but as a guide. She gave me the name of a colleague she trusted and encouraged me to start gathering formal records, financial transfers, bank statements, phone logs. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving towards something real, not revenge, but clarity, justice. The next day, I opened a new email account and sent a carefully worded message to Karen and David. I didn't mention what I'd found. I simply requested a list of all documents I'd signed in the past year. No reply. I sent a second message. Still silence. So I called the legal office directly and asked to speak with Melissa Crane. "This is she," the voice replied, smooth, clipped, professional. "I'm calling regarding estate documents involving David and Karen Larkin. My name is Margaret Larkin. I believe my signature may have been used without my full understanding." There was a pause, the kind that says she knows. "I'm afraid I can't discuss client details without authorization," Melissa said. I thanked her and hung up. But now I had confirmation. She knew exactly who I was. That evening, I revisited the surveillance footage. I had recorded on my phone. I uploaded everything to a secure drive. Then I documented a statement in my own words on camera, describing every event in detail. I labeled it "in case of silence." I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. I met with Betty's lawyer friend 2 days later. She was sharp, kind, and methodical. "We went over everything," she said. She nodded slowly as I showed her the documents. "You've got leverage," she said. "Even if you don't want to pursue legal charges, you can use this information to protect yourself, ensure your financial records are corrected, and if you choose, make sure they're exposed." I left the meeting feeling grounded. I had a plan now. Step by step, I would untangle what they did. Step by step, I would reclaim what they took. But before any legal motion, before any exposure, I had one more thing I needed to do: look Karen in the eye and ask her one question. Why? It was a Friday morning when I decided it was time. I'd rehearsed it 100 times in my head, what I'd say, how I'd say it. But when the moment came, I felt an eerie calm. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. I dressed in my best navy cardigan, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons my husband always loved. Then I packed a folder, footage, printouts, documents, and slipped my phone into the front pocket. David answered the door. He looked surprised, disoriented even. "Mom, I didn't think," I said, stepping past him before he could finish. "You didn't expect to see me again?" Karen was in the kitchen. She turned and froze, a half-cut apple in her hand, the knife suspended midair. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I ignored her and placed the folder on the table between them. "Sit." They sat. The silence in that room stretched thin, like something about to snap. I opened the folder and took out the first page, the receipt for the mortgage payment. "Let's start with this," I said. David shifted. "We talked about that." "No," I cut in. "You talked. I listened. You said it was temporary, that you were struggling, that you just needed a hand." He looked away. Next, I slid out a screenshot from the security app showing the hidden cameras. "Then there's this." I found 3 cameras, in the hallway, in my bedroom, and under the cabinet in the living room. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Karen's eyes widened. "They were for security." "Really?" I said, my voice tightening. Then why didn't you tell me? Why hide them in my private spaces? No answer. I continued, and then there's this. I laid out the revised will, the one removing me entirely from the estate, signed in my name. David's face turned pale. I never signed this, he said. This isn't my signature. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. I waited. Then I added, I spoke to a lawyer, a real one, and you'll be hearing from her soon. The room stayed quiet for several seconds, the kind of quiet where all the masks start to crumble. Finally, David said, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I turned to him. Then how far was it supposed to go? His face was pale. We were drowning. The mortgage was rushing us, and you just had all that money sitting there. Sitting there? You mean the savings from a lifetime of work, from burying your father and starting over, from skipping vacations and working 14-hour days in hospice care. That money, his voice cracked. We didn't mean to. Yes, you did, I said coldly. You meant every moment of it. You didn't slip into this. You planned it. You convinced me to move in. You isolated me. You erased me from the finances. And then you watched me from a camera like I was a tenant in your house. Karen finally spoke. You were always difficult. I turned slowly to her. Excuse me? You micromanaged. You always had comments about how we raised Emily, about how the house was run. You were suffocating. My stomach turned. And that justified what you did? That gave you permission to spy on me, to treat me like a stranger. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't apologize because she didn't feel sorry. Not really. David glanced at Karen, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, shame, or maybe just fear of consequences. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a single flash drive. This contains everything, I said. The footage, the emails, the bank transfers. I've backed it up in 4 places and sent copies to 2 people I trust. David swallowed hard. Let me be clear, I continued. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here to inform you. Karen looked up. Inform us of what? I leaned forward, calm and measured. You no longer have any say in my life. You will not contact me. You will not speak on my behalf. You will not touch another cent that is tied to my name. David's face twisted. We didn't take anything else. Not yet, I said. But I'm ensuring you never can. That's when the shift happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. Final. They were no longer the ones holding the power. I was. I stood up. Emily deserves better than this, I said. And whether you realize it or not, you've damaged her far more than you've damaged me. I walked toward the door. Karen's voice cracked behind me. You're seriously going to just cut us off? I turned back, looking at her one last time. You already did that, I said. You just didn't expect me to notice. And with that, I left. No more tears, no more questions. Just clean, hard truth and my own future finally back in my hands. The house was quieter than usual. The next morning, I arrived with 2 suitcases and a plan. My lawyer had already filed the paperwork, notice of financial fraud, forged documents, and revocation of power of attorney. The locks on my accounts were reset. My name was restored where it belonged. David wasn't home. Karen stayed upstairs. No words were exchanged, and I didn't need any. I moved through the house with calm efficiency. I packed only what was mine, not everything, just enough. Clothes, photo albums, my sewing kit, the first book I ever bought with my own paycheck. The rest I left behind like a snake shedding dead skin. A small part of me expected. Some dramatic chase to the door. Tears begging apologies, but none came, just silence. And, honestly, that was worse. The indifference was the final confirmation. They were never sorry. As I shut the door behind me, I paused not to look back, but to breathe. Really breathe. The air outside felt different, fresher, lighter. I hadn't realized how heavy the atmosphere had become until I stepped out of it. That's how it works, doesn't it? You don't notice the weight until it's gone. My new place was small, just a two-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a quiet complex in Tempe. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Mine to decorate, to walk around barefoot in, to leave dishes in the sink if I wanted. The first night, I slept with the window cracked open and the fan humming. No cameras, no footsteps outside my door, no whispered conversations or side eyes over dinner. Just peace. I cried that night, but they weren't the tears of loss. They were tears of relief, of reclaiming myself. I'd spent years shrinking, bending, accommodating, convincing myself that I was being generous, that my sacrifices were love, that their coldness was just stress or pressure. But it wasn't. It was a pattern, a story I'd lived before. When my husband passed away, I told myself I'd never let anyone make me feel invisible again. But grief makes you soft, lonely, willing to trust people who haven't earned it. This time, I wasn't going to let that mistake define me. The next few weeks were filled with small victories. I changed my phone number. I transferred the remaining assets into a secure trust. My name, my rules. I filed a report with Adult Protective Services, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the right thing to do. What they did to me wasn't just unkind. It was illegal. My lawyer told me I had a strong case. The forged will alone was enough to pursue charges, not to mention the financial exploitation and surveillance. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in courtrooms. I wanted to spend it living. Still, I made sure every legal boundary was clear, crystal clear. No access, no contact. I was done. One afternoon, I stood in line at a used bookstore when I saw a little girl trying to reach a copy of Charlotte's Web. Her mother smiled and lifted her up the way I used to lift David when he was 5. And it hit me, somewhere along the line, he stopped being that little boy. And I had spent too long mourning someone who no longer existed. So I let him go. Not with anger, not even with sadness, just space. The kind of space that's needed to heal a wound that isn't fresh anymore but still deep. I started volunteering at the local senior center. I taught a beginner's quilting class. I made a few new friends. One of them, Denise, invited me to karaoke night on Fridays. I laughed the first time she suggested it. I haven't sung in public since 1989, I said. Perfect. She grinned. That means you've got years of bad singing to unleash. And you know what? I went. I sang Dancing Queen in a shaky voice, 2 octaves too high and completely off-key, and people clapped. Not because I was good, but because I was free. That's what freedom feels like. Not perfect, but yours. Mine. I kept the flash drive in my drawer for a while, just in case. But eventually, I realized I didn't need to look at it again. It had served its purpose. It was no longer a threat, just evidence of a chapter that had closed. One evening, as I sat on my little balcony sipping mint tea, I watched the Arizona sun melt into the horizon, orange and pink and quiet. And I smiled because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't trying to make sense of their choices. I was just here in a life I'd rebuilt with my own hands, with boundaries like walls and joy like sunlight sneaking in through the cracks. They called me a burden, but I turned their insult into a beginning. They tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back in. And now, every day I wake up with a single solid truth. I didn't escape. I chose freedom. The apartment wasn't much to look at when I first moved in, just a bare living room with scuffed wooden floors and blank beige walls. But it had big windows that let in morning light. And when I opened them, I could hear birds instead of muffled arguments. That first weekend, I bought a rug, bright teal with patterns that reminded me of the desert flowers in spring. Unexpected, bold, and alive. I laid it in the center of the living room and sat cross-legged on it like a child, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug I found at a thrift store. It was the first thing I chose for me. From there, it snowballed. Yellow throw pillows, a soft gray blanket, plants. I bought plants. Me, someone who had never once kept anything green alive for longer than a week. But this time was different. I was ready to nurture something again. I gave each plant a name: iris, jade, ferny, and I talked to them while I watered them. I don't care if that sounds silly. They were growing, and so was I. Every morning, I opened all the windows. I made my coffee slowly, taking time to stir in cinnamon like my mother used to do. I'd light a sandalwood candle and play music, soft jazz or old folk records, and let the sound fill every corner of my space. There were no cameras watching, no footsteps pacing behind my door, no tension like static in the air. Just the smell of brewed coffee, the warmth of morning sun, and silence that felt peaceful, not hollow. One afternoon, I rearranged my bedroom, moved the bed under the window, and bought a lamp with a stained glass shade that made everything glow in amber tones at night. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since David was a toddler. I wrote without censoring myself about grief, anger, hope, laughter, cravings, and the stupid TV shows I now had time to binge. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. I started walking every evening down a little trail by the Salt River. Sometimes I brought a sandwich and sat on the bench near the water, watching ducks paddle around like they had nowhere urgent to be. Other times I just walked past cactus blooms and dusty trails, feeling the rhythm of my breath match the swing of my steps. I joined a painting class at the rec center, not because I was any good, believe me, I wasn't, but because I could. I picked up a brush and let the colors spill without worrying whether it was pretty or right. I painted what I felt, bold swirls, messy lines, sunsets bleeding into each other. It felt good to make something without fear, to create without permission. There were new people in my life now. Denise from karaoke, always 2 steps ahead of me with some adventure. Ramon, the quiet man from the painting class who wore paint-splattered jeans and talked more with his eyes than his mouth. He once handed me a sketch he drew, just a cactus, but it was somehow gentle. "Thought it looked like you," he said with a shrug. Tough, but still standing. I kept it pinned to my fridge. My therapist, yes, I started seeing one, told me that healing wasn't a straight line. And she was right. Some days the old shame would creep back in. A memory would ambush me, a cold stare, a slammed door, the sound of my own voice being dismissed. But now I didn't stay in those memories. I acknowledged them, breathed through them, and returned to the present, to my cozy kitchen, my growing plants, my playlist humming softly in the background. One night it rained real heavy rain. Arizona doesn't get that often. I made soup, carrot ginger, and curled up by the window with my journal. The rain tapped against the glass like a lullaby, and I realized something. I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. I was alone, yes, but there's a difference. Loneliness is hollow. This was full of me. I had stopped chasing apologies that were never going to come. I stopped blaming myself for loving too hard, giving too much, or hoping they'd be better. I accepted the truth. They didn't value me. But that didn't mean I had no value. I had simply given my love to people who didn't know how to receive it. Now I was saving that love for myself and for those who could hold it gently. I wrote a letter one morning, not to send, but to close the loop. I wrote to David. I told him I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine. I released the version of him I clung to, the little boy who once picked wildflowers for me on Mother's Day. I thanked him for the memories, and then I let him go. I burned the letter in a ceramic bowl on the balcony, watching the smoke drift up into the sky and with it the last trace of my guilt. Today, I wake up not with dread, but with curiosity. I wonder what book I'll read, what flower might bloom next on the windowsill, what ridiculous story Denise will tell over iced tea. I dance in the kitchen. I talk to my plants. I wear the bold earrings I used to think were too much. I'm not too much. I never was. I was just too much for the wrong people. And now I am exactly enough for me. There are moments in life when everything changes, not all at once, but like dominoes tipping quietly until the picture rearranges itself. Long time I believed love meant sacrifice, that to be a good mother, a good woman, I had to be quiet, agreeable, forgiving. I held back my own needs. I smoothed over every rough edge. I stayed even when staying hurt. But here's the truth no one tells you. Love without respect is not love. Care without freedom is not care. And family without kindness is just a word. I spent years trying to prove my worth in a house where I was seen as an obligation instead of a human being. I paid off a mortgage thinking it would earn me space in their hearts. Instead, I got silence, secrets, and surveillance. They called me a burden. So I paid their debt and walked away forever. And in leaving, I found everything I'd lost: my voice, my joy, my peace. Freedom didn't come in a grand moment. It came in small, quiet choices: drinking my coffee slowly, rearranging my furniture, laughing too loud with new friends, buying flowers just because. It came in forgiving myself for not leaving sooner, for loving people who didn't love me back in the way I deserved. I don't miss them. I miss who I thought they were. That's a different kind of grief, but one I've learned to live with. Now I wake up in a space that feels like mine. Every book on my shelf, every plant on my windowsill, every note of music drifting through my apartment, it all belongs to a life I built on my terms. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: sometimes the ones who claim to love us the most are the ones who try to control us. But freedom, once taken back, is the most beautiful kind of peace. So, if you're out there watching this, wondering if you're the problem because someone made you feel small, unwelcome, or invisible, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me: you're not too much. You're not asking for too much. You are just surrounded by people who gave too little. You deserve better. You always have. And now, if you don't mind me asking, if you discovered someone watching your every move, what would you do? Let me know in the comments.